Hi again, everyone. I'm Ollie Matthews. This is the Narcissistic Resistance. And this resistance video is sponsored by contribution from Anonymous. And here's his story. And this is going to be a long one. This is the 16,000 word story. So it might be a few hours. Here we go. Hi, Ollie. I found your channel via one of Angie Atkinson's videos and have been hooked ever since. You're a godsend for someone who's only recently discovered the narcissism survivor moment. I've been educating myself, having numerous aha moments, putting so much craziness into context. After half a life of isolation and insanity, I finally want to start getting my story out, so I can, at long last, get some much needed validation after all this time. It's funny. I've always wanted to get my story told, but I never would have imagined it would have been done with a dude from New Jersey who looks like Julian from Trailer Park Boys. Even rocking some of the same earrings as him in your early videos. You know, I didn't even realize that until I went back and looked. Like, holy shit, I was rocking. Yeah, I was still rocking some hoop earrings, you know. It is depressing going back a little bit, seeing like I was fat then, I'm fat now, and then the in between is just like, ugh. So, but yeah, that's funny. Still, I'm glad and extremely thankful for the opportunity you've provided. I respect and value your experience, your intuition, and your very talented skills of analysis, along with your character and integrity. And I can certainly use your input as I am at the crucial moment before I make moves to go no contact with my narcissistic family unit after barely surviving a surreal nightmare of a life. This letter barely scratches the scratch of the surface of half a lifetime of Narkel, and memory problems persist, so do give me the benefit of the doubt if stories have gaping holes in them. I try to cover the beats as much as possible while trying to cram in everything relevant to give you an understanding of where I'm coming from. With that out of the way, let me begin. I was born in 1981 in Montreal, and I have been here my whole life. My father is French-Canadian, born in the early 50s into a comfortable suburban middle-class life. Incidentally, he was born 2 months premature. My mother is Irish-Canadian, born in the late 40s, and grew up on a farm in the rural part of the country. Okay, so baby boomers. Her father and his siblings, including his sister, who I was very close with, came from a home with an ignorant and abusive father. You could tell by their beaten dog dispositions. Apparently, my grandmother, a traveling teacher, met my grandfather and immediately felt sympathy for him. That's how they got married and had my mother. It's always that sympathy, man. That's what narcs strive on, is somebody who's going to give them sympathy, i.e. put up with their bullshit. They tried to have other children but were unsuccessful, so they adopted 2 other children, and my mother had 2 adopted siblings, a younger sister and brother. She was particularly close with her sister. We'll call her Evelyn. My mother's father also died in 1982, shortly after I was born. Parents meaning and mother. My parents met while they were both in university in Montreal. From what I understand, and I'm not 100% about this, my mother noticed that there was something off with my father. This brought out pity from her and made her feel sorry for him and endeared him even more to her. That's bullshit. Let me tell you something here. No woman wants to be with a man that she has to pity. That's not what a woman searches for in a man. They search for strength. They search for somebody who's going to take care of things. Unless you're a woman with an agenda. Unless you're a covert narcissist looking for something you can control and hide behind. My mother, a social worker who worked with foster children, was in her early 30s and had suffered from compromised health her whole life, including type 1 diabetes, the one that requires daily blood tests. She loved children and wanted to have many, but felt her biological clock was running out fast. I believe she was an empath and also likely suffered from low self-esteem. No, man. The biological clock was ticking, 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 ticking. She looked for someone she could deem as pathetic, who needed pity, i.e. that's somebody I can control and get what I want. A baby. Probably you. Sounds to me right off the bat, your mother's a covert narc pulling the strings on everybody. That's what it sounds like. Because that's what it's setting up to be. I suspect that her sister Evelyn might have been possibly disordered as well, but I'll get to that later. My father was just starting his career as a lawyer in his late 20s. He was already married and in the process of getting a divorce when he met my mother and got her pregnant with me. I attended my own parents' wedding in Evelyn's arms. So your mother is deeming the married man pathetic. Right? Is that what it is? And what was the pity from? You haven't gone into that yet. What was it that she pitied him over? Was it over his horrible marriage to his first wife that she's conveniently going to be there to pick up the pieces from? Like my father, I was also born 2 months premature and was kept in an incubator for 6 to 8 weeks, almost not making it at one point early on. My mother was very sick when I was born, so I assume that was the reason. But I survived that and was born into this very convoluted situation between my parents. 2 and 4 years later, respectively, my 2 other sisters were born in good health. I have very little to no memory of my infancy or now even well into my childhood years. I was diagnosed with autism at some point early on, and I can confirm to you myself that it is a legit diagnosis. The movie Temple Grandin does a great job showing what it is like for me growing up. Now, after much struggle and effort, I am high functioning with a score of 30 on the autism spectrum quotient test. My mother took me to countless specialists, such as speech pathologists, physiotherapists, to help me learn balance, and many others I don't recall with enough detail, all to help me become functional. Without it, I would never have stood a chance. She was dedicated enough to do this over a period of many years, and I am extremely grateful for it. Here's what I'm discovering more and more with people who have autism, people I speak with who I have autism, and what I have gotten a lot of them to realize privately. Not that your autism isn't real, that the condition isn't real. It is. But is the condition being caused by the narcissist in your life? Is it a reaction to the narcissist in their life? And a lot of times, okay, the things that you are extremely grateful for, her dedication to getting you through autism, be sure that that's not what was fueling her in the first place. So your autism is feeding her need to be needed and to be this caregiver. Okay? by her, whatever's causing it, and then your behavior, and then it's just a cycle. I'm not saying that's what's going on with your situation. I'm saying that's what the experience I've had with a few other people in the past is like, wow, yeah, it was a reaction to her being neglectful. It took in another case, it calmed down the craziness. If the craziness wasn't on me, then she was creating the craziness. So I realized that my autism and my acting out and was my way of controlling the narcissist, was way of controlling the situation. And the narcissist goes along with it because they can draw pity and sympathy off it as well. So really look deeper. Not saying that your diagnosis is fake. What I'm saying is be sure your mother didn't cause the condition in the first place, which is the case most of the time. Autism generally is a reaction to bad, neglectful parenting. Along with the unwavering medical and developmental help, my mother encouraged my creativity and development. She enrolled me in the Boy Scouts, made me learn chess, even let me take a cartoon drawing course at one point. She also encouraged this in my sisters, as well as we all took piano lessons. My mother would also take us to church every Sunday, including Sunday school. Her love and care are, I believe, what gave me the strength, courage, humanity I needed to survive what was to come. Father and family. As for my father, well, my mother's parents allegedly said that my mother could have done better. My father not only rapidly gained weight once the deal was sealed, he seemingly refused to do anything regarding raising the children apart from grudgingly having to pay for them, all while demanding credit for all the stuff he's supposed to do. He would just lounge sprawled out on the couch, burping loudly. Think Barney from The Simpsons. Laughing childishly at lowbrow comedy, eating junk food, and would often beg in a whiny, pouty victim kind of voice for us to do and get everything for him. Family dinners were cold and dreadful. I remember my father smacking his lips at us whenever we made noise eating, keeping in mind that this man had the worst table manners than the average farm animal. He would also obsess over the meat we ate, ensuring we picked the bone clean because there's still meat on there. Keep in mind, this guy is one of the most wasteful people you'll ever meet. Not only that, but my father was mind-bogglingly incompetent to the point where I felt pity, frustration, and embarrassment for him, even in childhood. He couldn't even help with arithmetic homework. That embarrassment extended into the public too, not just because of the obesity, but because of the temper tantrums, the grandstanding, and the general rudeness to everyone. I thought you said your father was a lawyer. Did I get that wrong? I could have sworn you said, yeah, you said your father's a lawyer. Yeah, you said your father's a lawyer. Well, that's not surprising. I mean, I know some pretty bad. Getting a law degree in Canada is... it's not like getting a law degree in the United States, I'll say that. I do know some dumb Canadian lawyers. Not from this channel, don't ask, but I do know some dumb Canadian lawyers. It is mind-boggling. You know, it's funny because mind-bogglingly incompetent is what I call this person who is a lawyer. Is the dumbest person you ever want to talk to, yet he somehow got a law degree in Canada. I mean, and apparently his family member has a law degree and never went to college. Like right out of high school, they have some kind of weird system how you can be a lawyer up there. So yeah, it is absolutely believable. Now, that it is absolutely believable that your father could be a lawyer and not be able to do arithmetic. That is absolutely believable. My heart would jump out of my mouth every time I saw his car pull up, and the dread and anxiety took over. We all pretty much lived in terror, not knowing when my father would go off over whatever random reason. Whenever I did something wrong, I begged my mother not to tell my father. She on occasion tried to stand up to him for me, only to have my father shriek at her. He terrorized everyone into submission. He was a consistently cruel, condescending, constantly sarcastic. I recall at the time almost preferring Homer Simpson as a father because, as bad and as abusive as he was, at least he would apologize and do something to make up for it by the episode's end. That never happened with my father. No, the narcissist never, ever apologized. And remember, your mother got with your father because she pitied him and that endeared him. No. No. The closest I got was what I called his asshole tax in my teens. He'd be an asshole 90% of the times and then do his aw shucks, I'm just a nice misunderstood guy doing my best routine. Then the hoovering stops and the abuse cycle resumes. The relationship between my parents was frigid and unhealthy. I can't recall a single moment of affection between them. My mother's diabetes was a point of contention. Her blood sugar would drop, requiring her to eat sugar so as to not lose consciousness. She would be in a non-conscious fatigue state, happening often at night, and it was potentially life-threatening. I would wake up many nights hearing my father yell and scream at my mother to eat. Even worse, I would hear him trying to force her down the stairs, almost to the point where it sounded like he was shoving her. There was definitely a lot of physical force used. What is what is happening here? Your father's just an overt narcissist. Your mother's using her diabetes, okay? I've seen people do this. People who use diabetes to control their family. It's the same people that are constantly going to the hospital. It's the same type of person that's a fucking hoarder. It's just another means of control. So your father's just a 90% asshole most of the time. Your mother's controlling about making the attention about her, and she's gonna die, and she's constantly going into a diabetic coma. They're crazy. It's borderline. Look, to me, it already sounds like your mother's a borderline. Borderline personality disorders love having diabetes, because that is something where you could put yourself in a comatose state. But boy, I've seen people die, found dead, go in the diabetic coma, diabetic shock, and nobody's around. And boom, dead. It's all manipulation. This is manipulation on your mother's part. And your mother's manipulating by hiding behind the chaos that is your father. It's no wonder you had autism, because you shut down. It's a defense mechanism to this. By you being autistic, it probably forced your mother to take better care of her sugar, didn't it? Because then she couldn't take care of you if she was dead, and she couldn't use you to make herself the victim anymore. This shit, I guarantee, happened later on when you became more self-sufficient. That's when she started doing shit with the sugar. She would often resist him, as my father would admit decades later. My mother was always compliant with her to everyone else. Evelyn, for example, during these states. It was only with him that she was resistant. So she was doing it on purpose. These type of conflicts would also occur when she was awake and lucid. Listen, she's looking for sympathy from everyone else. She's looking to be combative with your father. Okay, so she could get more sympathy for everyone else. Your mother was doing this on purpose. These types of conflicts would also occur when she was awake and lucid. I would remember often at restaurants during vacations, they would often fight, but not loudly to avoid attention. I just remember my mother saying no to my father over and over, and my father fuming and hissing, "Fuck you," back at her. It's like being out with Laura and Brian. Oh, except there was no hushed tones. It was just, "Fuck you." Didn't matter. Didn't matter. Didn't matter where you were. Father and I. At home, my father treated me as his personal servant and emotional toilet. He would just unload on me for 15 minutes at a time with nonstop verbal and emotional diarrhea. I remember him often saying how I always did the bare minimum, which messed me up for some time. That's what I was always accused of. Bare minimum Matthew. Bare minimum Matthew is what. Fuck you. Fuck you. Narcissists are bare minimum parents. That's the problem. Bare minimum parents. And they want credit for it. He was exactly like the father in your typical baby boomer narcissist parents video. I could never do anything right, and he always had endless condescending lectures and haughty monologues. His favorite saying was, "Anything worth doing is doing well." Boy, do they love their fucking cliches. Boy, do they love. It's no doubt that the T-shirt slogans came out in their fucking generation. Boy, if that doesn't just explain the fucking narcissists, the baby boomers, they are just a fucking generation of T-shirt slogans. That's their claim to fame. T-shirt slogans. His favorite saying was, "Anything worth doing is worth doing well," which apparently didn't apply to fathering, parenting, or washing hands after using the toilet. On weekends, my mother would force him to take me with him when we went on his shopping binges for grown-up toys, gadgets, and anything with buttons. Remember Laserdiscs? He had quite a collection. He never spoke to me except to order me around, and from what I remember, how I felt, verbally abused me. Same thing for playing catch, which he clearly did not want to do. We'd both half-ass it, not saying a word, like the scene from some Wes Anderson movie. My only safe space was video games, but this just fed ammo to his argument that I was lazy. Another key dynamic was the linguistic factor. I was diagnosed with a language learning disability, and thus we spoke English at home. Despite that, my father would yell at my sisters and I to speak French, even though he never spoke it himself. Telling him we didn't know would just provoke him more, and we would all be past the point of tears, and he wouldn't stop. It was just messed up. If that weren't enough, having a French name and being a native English speaker is very alienated experience in Montreal. Yeah, I know it is. And let me tell you something, okay? Let me tell you something. Fuck that. Fuck that. You guys should be speaking English in Montreal. I can't believe that's the problem with the Canadian government, is they're a bunch of pussies. You guys should have never, ever, ever gotten away with what you got away with up there with this whole back in the 70s. Okay, and I'm telling you this, there is an arrogance in the French Canadians and an arrogance in their culture and a deep-seated narcissism in their culture, man. You're not alone in this, okay? You know how many French Canadians I have on my channel with these same type of controlling parents? Nobody likes French Canadians. Nobody. The worst. Especially down here. Ugh, the snowbirds, the locals, we don't like the snowbirds to begin with. But if you see some friggin' license plates from Quebec, get off the road, lock the door. If you see a car with Quebec license plates pulling up, okay, and they're coming into your business, lock the doors. They're going to waste your time. They're going to try to tell you how expensive everything is. They're going to talk to you about the fucking exchange rate. They're going to have you write stuff up and kick the tires and then walk out and tell you they're going to come back. They love to waste your time. They love it. So yeah, I know how they get when you don't speak French to them. You want to speak French? Go to France. Unreal. Without getting into a whole lecture about it, oh, sorry. The French and English divide is deep and centuries-long conflict that runs to this day. Yeah, I know. As such, I would get shit from all sides. Racial slurs and prejudice, even got called a race traitor at one point. This would continue and cause problems for me my whole life. Yeah, dude, you got to get out of Quebec. You got to get out. Nobody else. Outside of Quebec, nobody fucking cares. Nobody cares. And the rest of the goddamn country lets the goddamn French Canadians fucking bully them on everything else. They come down here and they try that French shit. And they can get away with it half the time because there's a lot of Haitians here, so there is a lot of French. One last item of interest. On the top of the TV in my parents' bedroom, there was a small statue of an anxious-looking cartoon man flushing himself in the toilet with the words carved underneath, "Goodbye, cruel world." I don't know the story behind it, but it no doubt had some effect on my psyche, as it was the last thing I would see when exiting their room. I've seen those a million. They were just like a popular thing that, you know, they thought was funny. I think my grandmother had one, in fact. Yeah, I'm pretty sure. I've seen those a bunch of times when I was a kid. Those are nothing new. Growing up, I was fortunate in the suburbs on a good street with a lot of children my age in a good neighborhood, which gave me a healthy, positive experience outside of the one at home. Despite that, I was sent to school out of town, ostensibly because I had my language problems, while my sisters both went to a school 3 blocks away. In high school, I would end up being sent to an expensive private school downtown over 6 miles away. My sisters would go to an all-girls private school less than a mile away. Throughout school, I was virtually always alone and frequently the target of bullies. The very few friends I made were disordered, sketchy types. One of them, Tommy, stood out. Tommy was a definite borderline narc and barely closeted homosexual. He came from pure white trash family that made me think of the Connors from Roseanne. Sleepovers were unpleasant to say the least, aside from the creepy gay stuff Tommy would do. One time I was forced to share the same bed as him. At one point I woke up and had no pants and was naked from the waist down. I remember getting home and just running past my mother and going to play video games, not saying a word the entire time. It's worth mentioning at this point that I recall the waking up naked, the waist down incident also occurred once at my home one night. I was sleeping on the top bunk of my sister's room, same deal. Woke up naked, the waist down, no pajama pants to be found anywhere. I assumed at the time I had wet the bed and my parent had removed my pants, but now who knows? Yeah, who knows? Death is just part of life. In the summer of 94, when I was 12 years old, I had just finished grade 7. My mother passed away from cancer. Wow. My sister and I knew she was very sick for nearly 2 years, but we didn't know what it was, as it was kept from us. I guess I was catatonic about the whole thing because I don't recall any emotional reaction. My first action after was calling my friend, talking about going to the public pool, then commonly mentioned at the end, "Oh yeah, my mother just died." To get our minds off it, my father took us, his 3 children, and his parents on a road trip through various parts of eastern Canada. One memory I never forgot was when the family went to a restaurant on top of a cliff somewhere. My grandmother was complaining about a fan or something, and this set my father off. So I was outside to get some air. I walked to the side of the cliff overlooking the forest below. I don't know how long I was there, but I felt like I was just moments from throwing myself off the cliff into the trees below when my youngest sister came out and told me to come back in. I knew back then I had no chance of surviving with this man as my father. I was 100% right. Seems like your mother knew she was in poor health at the beginning and she was in a rush to get married. I mean, 12 years old is hard to, that is hard to keep a cancer diagnosis away from a 12-year-old without you having any idea anything was going on. I guess that autism, you really must have escaped into your own world. Life after death. A woman who was teaching in my grade school happened to live behind our home in the apartment just next to ours. She helped when my mother died and soon thereafter came into the picture, eventually moving in. Her mother, an elderly, life-of-the-party type that coddled her daughter, took over her old apartment. I'm sure your spidey senses are tingling right now, Ollie. We'll call her Mussolini, and that was one of my nicknames for her. Should you give an idea of the person I took her for. She was a boomer and a definite narc with histrionic and or borderline traits, no question about it. She was hot and cold, often reverting to childlike behaviors. She would explode and cause a scene. She would throw salad bowls at my head, slap me upside the head, participate in practical jokes on me with my sisters, and was a source of never-ending insults and put-downs and jabs. Predictably, she barely did even a token amount of mothering and parenting. She also pitted the family members against each other, acting as a bridge between our father and us children. It seems all but obvious that Mussolini would lie to get more money from my father, who even once bought her a $2,000 sewing machine. In contrast, when I would ask for $20 to eat for the week at the school cafeteria because our new mom couldn't be bothered with making school lunches, he would glower at me and give me money reluctantly. My father himself later once said that even his friends told him, unless your kids are driving Lamborghinis, they shouldn't cost this much. Even a childhood friend would later tell me that his family knew Mussolini was just after my father's money, and my father, being the pathetic, desperate loser that he was, threw it at her, to the point where he asked her to marry him. Feel free to double face palm here. They would divorce 5 horrible, borderline rage-filled years later, and Mussolini, I could only assume, made off like a bandit, and I'm sure my father blamed his children for the whole thing. 5 years. You were 12 when your mother died. So that's putting you either at 18 or 19 at that point. So basically what he did, he paid for 5 years of not having to really be responsible for you. So you have to see, look, the narcissist puts a value on everything. And no matter what, okay, there was no price your father wouldn't pay to not have to parent you. You got to understand what he was after. He was after lacking responsibility. That's what he was after. So, if it costs him 5 years of borderline rage to do it, whatever. Whatever. And he gets to be the victim now. Isn't that nice? See how that works? It's like a hot potato. Who gets it now? I mean, the baby boomers, I mean, they could just flip it around. It's like who's got the narcissism hot potato now? Who's the victim now? I am. Down you go. A year after my mother's death, my father renovated the basement, and he moved me down there. Despite the fact I was 6'4" and too tall, I spent a big chunk of my life in that basement. I stayed there to avoid the rest of my family and was isolated alone, suffering terribly, and not having any idea to why. The few times I would get a call and my father would answer the phone and then angrily stomp on the floor for me to pick up. That should give you a solid idea of what life was like for me as a teenager and a young adult. Someone once told me growing up that there sounded like something from the first Harry Potter book. At one point in high school, I started cutting using a sharp corner of a ruler I had. I was hoping someone would notice it and take action, but that never happened, and my father and Mussolini would undermine and infantilize me any way they could. My friend performing at a bar, forget about it. They're serving alcohol, and I'm not able to handle being around drunk people. A class trip from my last year was torpedoed by Mussolini as we went shopping to Costco, and I put some meat in her crappy small freezer that had a defective door. The meat went bad and she used it as an excuse to not pay for the trip. Another time she made me drive the car up the driveway without telling me to keep my foot on the brake. I stopped the last second from nearly smashing into the house. Sabotage. Any excuse to take things away from you. I mean, that's just what they do. That's typical living life with a narcissist. Typical behavior. And the cutting is what I always say it's about. It's about trying to show people you're hurting and you're being abused. That's what it's about. Narc fathering. As for my father, it was the same as before, but only worse on every front. I was overworked, gaslighted constantly, and always vigilant to avoid any random narc rages. I cannot remember a single time my father ever praised me or said anything remotely positive. I do remember him having a gag reflex. He had to say something good about, if he had to say something good about me. This was a man who wouldn't cry over spilt milk, but would rather go nuclear ballistic. He'd catastrophize everything and make it all worse. As such, I could never express myself and was forced to keep everything inside. He would constantly compare me to others, ask why I wasn't doing this, or what random thing that just popped into his mind, and just hammered away at me any opportunity he had. He made me feel like an incompetent, unlovable loser, and I grew up most of my life believing everyone hated me and everything I did was wrong. I became a pure egoist and in my reaction to my father. No boundaries, fawning, and constantly people-pleasing. Here are some examples of his narc parenting at the time. In 1996, I represented my school at the Great Canadian Geography Challenge, and my father brought me to the location where one of my teachers was there to greet us. She told my father that she must be proud of his son. His scoffing response was basically, "No, I would have expected his sisters to do this, but not him." The speechless look on her face spoke volumes in how do I possibly respond to that kind of way. A year later, when I was with the Army Cadets, I went on Saturdays during high school. I had collapsed on the parade floor at the end of the day. Our parents had to sign something, so I called my father to come sign the document without mentioning I had fainted. He came and was told he didn't have to sign it there. The captain informed them I had collapsed just now, and my father completely ignored it and chewed me out on the drive back home for wasting his time. Once he almost tried, and this is what I'm trying to tell you, he wanted to do nothing with you. This is why he married Mussolini, so he didn't have to raise you, so he didn't have to do anything. He didn't give a goddamn about you. He could care less. Once he almost tried to run me over in the driveway. I walked in front of his car, and the car sped forward, only stopping a couple inches from me. To be clear, this was a few seconds, not a mini whiplash jerk when your foot momentarily slips off the brake. I just remember being frozen and looking at him with a mix of terror and disbelief. I recall going unknowingly gray rock with him, and he would have a jerk spasm reaction. This was dramatically revealed when he happened in the car and he jerked the wheel, causing the car to swerve around on the highway. I basically did everything I could to avoid my father as much as possible and tried to do what I could to move out. Even though, given my condition, I wasn't remotely able to live independently. Mussolini would tell me I could finally get my own apartment when I turned 14, so there was some definite encouragement for me to leave anyway. 14. It was like neither one of them wanted you around. I started college, depression kicks in. I started college at 16 in 1998 in computer science on my own dime. But it really was not for me, and I graduated a few years later into a minimum wage tech job. I had started working many jobs to pay for school, even working virtually the whole summer of 2000 at 2 different jobs. Despite being pretty shitty jobs, they offered me the chance to socialize. Meeting up with an old childhood friend at college helped me out well. But my autism and isolation since my mother's death seriously impaired my social skills, and my inner voice kept me socially anxious, neurotic mess, thanks to my father. I can't believe you're in college at 16. Most people don't go to college, start college till 18, 19 years old. I mean, seems like it was like anything to get rid of you. For what it's worth, sex seemed to be taboo in my home growing up, as my father was clearly uncomfortable with it, suggesting I leave the room whenever a blue scene would appear in one of his films. There's a condition I discovered over a decade ago that describes my experience perfectly. Love shyness, from Dr. Brian Gilmartin, which is basically that anything at all with sexual tension or intimacy would trigger a fierce adrenaline pumping freeze or flight response. You were trapped in your own brain, paralyzed, and had no idea why. And of course, women are not patient with a guy who's frozen in front of them, not to mention one who is incapable of picking up her cues in the first place. Fuck my life. Well, based on what happened to you as a kid, I mean, it would be no doubt why you would freeze up when you see something sexually on TV. It's a truly insidious form of hell, and it would only by my mid to late 20s, and it would only by in my mid to late 20s when it would only be in my mid to late 20s when I finally began to realize that girls actually liked me and were attracted to me. Before then, it was so far in a concept, you might as well have told me the sky was green. Even with that knowledge, it was just bitter, cold comfort and did nothing to dial down the love shyness. This meant I could pretty much forget about having a love life, even though at the time I didn't know why. Well, that's not entirely true. I did know. I was looking for a surrogate mother, or at least someone who would listen to me and empathize, i.e., I was a big fat codependent, right? Which is what I'm trying to tell you, what I think your autism was about. It was about the codependency with your mother. I'm telling you, that's what it was about, man. Consequently, attempts at finding love started badly, would end even worse, and heartbreak would knock me into a half-year-long depressions. Naturally, I was, in hindsight, attracted to emotionally unavailable narc women. Naturally, I became victimized by them, sometimes. Damn it. Oof. 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 Oh. Weather changes every day in Florida. So, right, I'm telling you, this is what your autism was about. It's about codependency with your mother. Your mother was looking right from the get with your father for some type of codependent relationship with anyone. Naturally, I was, in hindsight, attracted to emotionally unavailable narc women. Naturally, I became victimized by them, sometimes rather awfully. One in particular... Excuse me. Oh, I gotta pause. I'm back. All right. The problem with a beard is sometimes it just grows, and when it touches the bottom of your nose, it just drives you insane. So, okay, we're better. Okay. Okay, naturally I became victimized by them, sometimes rather awfully. One in particular, Stephanie H., was a truly demonic succubus. Stephanie H., in parallels to your story with your first wife, was someone who I really did not like. But then some switch was turned on in my head, and my life inexplicably revolved around her. I somehow thought that she would be the one who finally listened to me and help me. Oh, but how very wrong I was. Yeah, you were looking for a codependent relationship is what was going on. See, with me and my ex-wife, I never liked her, but I wasn't looking for anything from her. I just couldn't figure out how to get the hell away from her. I just couldn't. Dark Autumn. My sister has went onto my computer and read some of my writings, which contained suicidal ideation, and this prompted pressure on my father to make me see a therapist. I ended up with a therapist who was very kind and sympathetic, but then the autistic prison, the CPTSD, the endless narc abuse and neglect and soul-crushing isolation and heartbreak, my father's inner voice, and my non-stop self-sabotaging all piled up to a point of critical mass. I was in total despair and hopelessness that would not stop getting worse and worse. In the fall of 2002, 21 years old, out of school and unemployed, I decided to go see Evelyn in her home province. I didn't intend on coming back. I went there by bus and on my way back, stayed overnight at the YMCA in a city between my home and between Evelyn's home and Montreal. I had bought a small bottle of vodka that I drank that along with a full bottle of antidepressants that were prescribed to me. That night I remember waking up and going to the public shower to vomit and then went back to sleep. The next morning I was fully dissociated. I mean, I only remember hoovering from behind my head like in some third-person video game. I have fractured memories of me somehow getting onto the bus back to Montreal and then taxiing back home. No one was there, so I managed to keep it a secret for a while. Eventually my family found out, but it only ended up with me seeing a bloody useless psychiatrist for a couple months. Mussolini, upon hearing of my attempt, called my father to angrily accuse him of driving me to suicide. He had told me this, then shot me a look. I don't know what to say since Miss Mussolini never told me she thought this way, and I certainly never said anything to her. Because she knew listen, Mussolini knew your father was a neglectful sack of shit. Just because she's a narc herself doesn't mean she doesn't know she's being used by your father. I dismissed it and then cut contact with her after that for pulling that bullshit stunt. She was hardly someone to cry crocodile tears, not only having enabled the abuse, but having actively participated in it. I hope she's miserable wherever she is now, and I'll leave it at that. Yeah, she deserves the misery. But that doesn't mean she doesn't know that your father... It doesn't mean she's not right. Doesn't mean she ain't right about what she said. Kindness of strangers. Thankfully, my therapist was still there to help me. At some point early on in the therapy, my father casually admitted to me that he had taken the little money that my mother had left me. Side note, sadly, she had no life insurance when she passed, and had given it to my therapist as payment for the sessions up to that point. I was over 18, and he had done so without my permission. He said it so flippantly as though it was a routine affair, instead of him stealing from me to pay someone to help with the hopeless task of repairing the damage he himself had done to me. My therapist, blessed her soul, helped me for many years after my father stopped paying her without asking anything from me. He would help. Yeah, well, she owed you at that fucking point. Goddamn right she did. She should have helped you. She accepted your fucking your mother's death inheritance as payment for you. Yeah, she helped you. Goddamn right she helped you because she didn't want you to sue her. That's horrendous. Her help would be vital in aiding me hold back the damage and survive the several years that would follow. Were it not for her and her decency, kindness, and humanity, I would not be alive. No, that's good. But understand something, she owed you because she accepted. Not that she knew it at the time, but once she found out, like, holy shit, she paid me with your death inheritance, your mother's death money. Yeah, she owed you at that point. In early 2003, the time bomb with Stephanie H. exploded, and she discarded me in a gesture that pretty much said, I don't need you anymore. Go ahead and kill yourself. She was the only other person I had revealed about my attempt to fall earlier. So for her to do this to me sent me over the edge. The pain and anguish was indescribable, and the trauma bond was unbearable. And the years that followed were an unspeakable, hellish existence. This would go on for nearly a decade. At the time, I wished that in her next life she would go through what I went through, only to encounter someone exactly like her. Now I just hope karma pile drives her into a very deep circle of hell. Again, without my therapist to get me through this, I wouldn't be alive here today. In fact, if I had access to a gun, I would have killed myself by then, guaranteed. Ditto for hard drugs or cyanide. Ditto if I had access to a building with more than 7 stories to achieve terminal velocity. I had done my homework. I'll tell you, I could have just as well have been David Sedaris' sister in your video, Narcissistic Abuse Makes You Want to Die Alone. The story fit me perfectly, and it could have been my sister in David's plays saying the exact same things. You were right, Ollie. The abuse does make you want to disappear, go off in the woods and die alone, never to be seen, no funeral, and wiped from everyone's memories. I obsessed about that all throughout my teens and especially my 20s. The trauma bond reached its peak in the summer of 2004. The only time of relief I would have would be a half second between wake and the little sleep I got. Dreams were always nightmares and anxiety. Then I would plunge back into total physical, emotional, mental, and psychic agony. I would fantasize about violently killing myself, such as including setting myself on fire and blowing my head off 100 times a day. I drank heavily, 40s of very strong malt liquor every night, as I had no access to anything else. All the while, during all of this, I was working 2 jobs 7 days a week, and my father still told people I was lazy. He would even yell and scream at me when I would get home from work and go straight to my bed to rest and recover. University years 2003 to 2008. I had started university in 2003 in the wake of Stephanie H.'s emotional rape and the subsequent deepest depression. I paid my way through it with whatever god-awful job I managed to find. But after what happened in 2004, I knew I had to get out of my father's home. In 2005, I moved in with some girls from an ad at my university housing board. It was a dump with a grungy hippie types and a bit of a drug den. But I liked the social vibe and felt what I needed at the time. Yeah, I know I fucked up. I stayed there a year, and it was a chaotic environment filled with all sports types coming and going, with at one point nearly a dozen people crashing there. Despite the dangerous, sketchy types, there were a lot of cool people. It was pretty chill most of the time, and it really lifted me out of my funk. But the insane chaos that got worse in 2006 I moved back to a small room in my father's home to finish university for good after having to drop out for a year to work full time. By the way, an example of that chaos worth mentioning, a crazed hippie who was mooching off the place had a psychotic breakdown and started screaming, "I am tobacco," waved a machete around and tried to knock down our doors. The next day, he was dragged out while still sitting in a chair and smeared blood on the window afterwards. Good times. The years 2006 to 2008 when I graduated were bad. It was not good being back at my father's place and tried to avoid it whenever possible. I kept to myself, stayed at internet cafes after class, worked at jobs, socialized when I could, but was still anxious, depressed, suicidal, and had abysmal health, was in chronic physical pain, not expecting to live past 30. At one point, I had even bought a book on self-deliverance, aka assisted suicide, called The Final Exit. Despite all that, I played to my strength and finally graduated in 2008. I had to cut my primary major just to get the heck out, so I ended up with my second non-marketable major, albeit with honors and distinctions. Not great for a career, but at least I finished what I started. I did, however, manage to get a 3.7 GPA and was even taken on as a teacher's assistant for an online course taught by the head of the department. Aside from my grandfather, my family didn't seem all that impressed. As a graduation gift, they got me a cheap watch that stopped working the next day. At any rate, I was wiped out. During my last semester, I worked 2 jobs and had taken 5 classes and was sick 3 times in a brutal Montreal winter. I just wanted to work and finally make some money, which I thought a degree would help with. Yeah, I know, you can't stop laughing now. Sucker. In the fall of 2008, my father suggested I stop seeing my therapist, and I could tell that it was my time to get the heck out of his house. I was already planning on ending my sessions with my therapist, who helped save me and helped me change my thinking to undo my father's damage, but I could not go on forever. I would still see her from time to time after that, trying to pay back as much as I could. Again, I must stress, without her help, I would not have made it. So consider that some faith in humanity was restored in this bitter old misanthrope. I had to find a new place to live, and I couldn't be by myself, as I would have surely killed myself within a month. In either case, I was too broke I was too broke and not a functional adult enough at that point to live by myself. This made me codependent on finding a roommate, and thus began a very dark, dangerous period of life that would last for the next several years. Your codependency is a leash, man. Heart of Darkness. Each of the parts of this chapter of my life is worthy of their own letters given the surreal, terrifying, traumatizing, and downright dangerous experiences I had, many of which could have ended very, very badly. That, and for the sick, messed up shit I saw that I didn't even know humans were capable of. Speaking of shit, that is what is with narcs leaving their shit in the toilet for you to find, and then giddily denying it when you call them out on it. This happened at least 4 separate times. This letter will be long enough, so I'm going to plow through and cliff notes this thing. I'm just sticking to the core points. First roommate experience was with a coworker from the incredibly toxic video game place I was working after university. He lived with his alcoholic friend who was sexually who was sexually aggressive when drunk, which was often, and like him, both were complete white trash degenerates. It was a horrible option, but it was close to my job, which helped with what my chronic insomnia and sleeping problems, and I desperately needed to get away from my father. I thought I could tough it out like I did a couple years back when I first moved out. I was wrong. For starters, to give a very small example, the guy I worked with had at least four complaints about his odor from work. The reason, well, if you opened the door to his room right next to mine, you'd suffer a violent gag reflex in usually under 3 seconds. Living there, I ended up being immersed in a lot of drunk white trash parties that would last all night and sometimes end in violence. It was a never-ending shit show, and the two conspiring against each other, and obviously me as well, and the constantly dragging me into the scheming, smear campaigns against me at my job, etc. It was an unlivable situation and had to get out after only a half a year. I talked to a couple people from work, and one guy seemed like a decent enough option. It was easy to get to work from his place. He seemed to have his shit together, being a photographer and a beat maker, so I jumped ship with him. I see red flags in hindsight and know why I ended up with them, even though at the time everything seemed normal. Because you're just jumping ship because you're living other people's lives trying to be codependent, and you're not living your own life, and you're always going to get suckered into some bullshit doing that. It was around the same time that my grandfather died, so I lost another relative whom I loved, who treated me like a human being. It was a rough time, but I was glad at my new destination. Things went well for a few months, then the mask dropped. Dom. The area I moved into was what you might consider the hood. Maybe not as hardcore as some of the ones they have in the States, but still not a pleasant place to live. This guy, who for now we'll call Dom, was Latino and what I call a single mother sociopath. Dom was around 30 at the time, and his mother has son-husbanded him to a jaw-dropping extent. She did virtually everything for him, chauffeured him around, showered him with money for nothing. I'm sure you see the problem with that, and yes, the problem was there in spades. Dom will need another letter to fully expose. I'll keep it short for now. Dom got fired and his employment insurance ran out after a few months. He became desperate, openly considering resorting to burglary at one point. A single mother girlfriend came into the picture and quickly convinced him to move in with her, who lived an hour away. He went for it, tried to fuck me over in the process, and his mother shamefully enabled him the whole way. I was sick with bronchitis twice in a row at this time, but managed to hold him off until the relationship imploded, and he came back with a groveling song and dance. Many months went by when his abuse and behavior slowly got worse until the summer when he lost all fucking control. Non-stop infantile tantrums, narc rage, juvenile delinquent bullshit like drinking 40s on public transportation, seriously perverted behavior, dude had major foot fetish, and the photography was just an excuse to get women. Harassing women from his balcony in public, I should add, was a daily occurrence. He wasn't able to go out without starting a random fight. He'd even slept with the wife of one of his friends right after we had told him not to, and he swore he wouldn't. Even then, I knew he was lying. Insult to injury, I had the misfortune to walk in on them. But finally, his own abuse on me was making me reach the boiling point, and with a possible retaliation from his friend to be wary of, it all came to a head one night when he sexually assaulted a teenage girl. Finally, Myself and someone else got the girl out of there, and then I had one of the worst weekends of my life. Long story short, Don got away with it, and I got out of his place intact and moved back into my father's basement. I was terrified and traumatized. A few times I would still get anonymous calls at night. When I moved back in, my father swore if I ever moved out with anyone else, he wouldn't help me, and he meant it. I stayed at my father's for a few months before moving in with my sisters in the middle, and my middle sister's fiance at the end of 2010. The trauma from my experience with Don was unrelenting, and I was back working at a horrible call center job with dismal hopes for the future. Around the same time, my mother's aunt died, so did my last remaining biological link to my mother's family. Her last years were mostly my surrogate wifed middle sister, shuttling her back and forth to family gatherings at our home, where she was pretty much ignored most of the time. It was shameful and humiliating. I increasingly turned to marijuana to cope with everything, something I wish I had done sooner, as I was mostly a social smoker before who only started in his 20s. That simply was not an option, though, with my father. My sister could have a dime bag on her desk in the open, and he'd only just do a frustrated huff and go about his day. Me, on the other hand, I don't even want to contemplate what his reaction would have been. 2012. The first half of 2012 was one of the best periods of my life. But by the summer's end, things came crashing down worse than before. Despite a promising start, an ultimately unhealthy relationship with a girl I entered into in the spring ended badly. Like before, I tried to defuse the time bomb, failed miserably, paid a dear price for it. I relapsed back into a depression and was suicidal once again. I was now 31. I was worse off than I was before. My problems only compounding. And now I had to face the prospect of being homeless. Let's back up a tiny bit to the living situation with my sisters and the fiance. The same pattern of behavior that we had growing continued, as you would expect. I was made to do a lot of chores and eventually felt excessive and deliberately so. There was also the usual abuse as well, the infantilizing and patronizing tones, the mocking and smirking comments, the dismissal of my needs and my problems, the gaslighting. You're also 31. You're also a grown man at this point, living in your sister's house. So you keep searching for codependency, and you're setting yourself up to be victimized here. Not everything in life is going to go perfectly either. And this is a problem that I've noticed a lot of Canadians and French Canadians have a hard time grasping. The complete lack of respect of my boundaries was quite apparent. They would literally go into my room whenever they wanted to dump and whenever they wanted to get rid of. One time in my room, my youngest sister barged in with a broken lamp, talking rapidly nonstop the entire time as she entered, and dropped the lamp and left, ignoring me, telling her I didn't want it. It was truly a bizarre thing to witness. My sister and fiance were getting married that fall, and we would all move out the following month. My youngest sister was already working in the States at the time. My other sister and her husband had a place covered with both families helping them out. Me, funny you should ask, since no one else bothered to. I was to leave, and that was it. No one bothered to ask if I had a place to go, much less offer any other offer of help. Depressed, suicidal, barely able to function. And not knowing if my temp job I had at the time would stick. There was no way I was getting into an apartment by myself. I reached out on Facebook and ended up with only one super sketchy option. It would be through a guy we'll call Marlo, who I met while living at Rod's and who had lived in the same area. Marlo had no longer talked to Rod and was not on good terms with another narc who was trying to use me to get an apartment himself. So those were points in his favor. He said he was a cook and that the area was safe. And we agreed I could stay the winter until I could find something else. I figured an uneasy entente between us could last a couple months. I packed my stuff as my sister and her husband honeymooned to Hawaii. A friend I had met a couple months prior had his own moving company, so he helped me move my stuff to the depressing shithole in the hood. The stuff nightmares were made of. There was dog shit in the hallway next to my door. My friend told me good luck on his way out. I had hit rock bottom like never before. Rock bottom. It was a dank, macabre, and terrifying experience. My neighbor upstairs was a crack mother with a violent boyfriend and a disturbed 16-year-old daughter. The neighbor next door looked like he was a roadie from an early 80s hair metal band and likely hadn't worked since the 80s either and would try to steal things from us. The front door was a weak wooden one that an 8-year-old could kick in. I slept with an old parachutist knife I had from my Army cadet days under my pillows. If not for outside threats, then from Marlo as well. Weird if somebody who's so apt for suicidal tendencies would sleep with a knife to protect themselves. I gotta ask her, there's all these suicides, all this suicidal stuff, all these suicide attempts. They're just calls for codependency, man. Because when the shit is down and your life's really in danger, you're gonna sleep with a knife under your pillow. Speaking of which, as it turned out, Marlo was not a cook. He allegedly just got let go. He got let go just before I moved in. Gee, no kidding, huh? And was in actuality, wait for it, running a weed grow op in his closet for the Russian mob. Ain't that some shit, eh, Ollie? He was a sketchy dude and a pathological liar. But yeah, he did have a Russian friend with a deep Slavic accent whom I talked to on the phone once. Plus, I saw a bright neon yellow Hummer outside our place. So yeah. That, and he went to prison apparently for assaulting a cop. Although it wasn't his fault. No, of course it wasn't. Maybe the cop assault thing was iffy, but Marlo was half Latino and had a violent temper. At one point, a mutual friend texted me after Marlo left huffing and puffing. Marlo had texted this guy saying he was going to kill him. I waited tensely until he came back, hot and bothered, said he almost got into a random fight. Ah, the memories. This guy was a straight-up sociopath whose grooming of me was so blatantly obvious. It could be used for an after-school PSA. Jokes aside, it was really dangerous and required vigilance and careful maneuvering. During this time, my temp job was extended, so I was working this quiet office job with a middle-aged woman bringing baked goods for office potlucks. It was a surreal experience, and the juxtaposition of experience was like something out of Breaking Bad. Scary climax. This lasted only 3 months into February 2013 before he decided to split because he couldn't afford the rent. He was going up north for days to camp to chop down trees. Yep, this was as suspect as it sounds. It was sordid, tense period of time. He didn't trust me and I didn't trust him. He only told me a couple days prior that he was leaving and that I needed to find somewhere else to live or else I would be stuck with the place. As fortune would have it, another far from ideal option presented itself with the guy I met a year before who had an opening. My other friend also still offered to help me move at a discount rate. I stayed up for days packing. It was the height of winter, Arctic temperatures, and he would yell at me to pack faster, get rid of my things, and so on. One night at 4 a.m., we went to the corner store, and as we left the store, two guys stepped in. My roommate remarked that one of them had a gun and was going to rob the store since it was Welfare Friday, when all the cash welfare checks go to the corner stores for beer, smokes, and lottery tickets. We waited outside in the frigid cold until the two would-be robbers finally left. Really not how I pictured my life at 30 would turn out to be. The moving out was scary business, including one heart-racing incident which I won't get into, but at least I got my stuff out and found a roof over my head for winter. Marlowe didn't want me out of his control, so he made sure to leave some of his stuff with me and know where I lived. He was out of town up north, but he would text me from time to time, and I lived in a state of endless dread and anxiety because of this. To top it all off, he made a proposition a couple months later to get another place together. Seriously, Ollie, can't make this stuff up. One item of note, when leaving, I had to throw out a bed my father had bought me in 2005. The metal frame was busted and long gone. The box had ripped holes and the mattress was stained by my sister's cat, who pissed 3 times on it and shat on it once. Side note, besides being allergic to fur, my family always grew up with pets. And guess who shared the same floor as the cat litter? On top of that, there was a bedbug scare, likely made up by my roommate, so I had to throw it out. Later on, my father found out, was not pleased, and would use his common-law spouse of then 5 years, who will call Edith, to triangulate me to this. She said, bedbug scare or no, I should not have thrown out that nasty old bed. Oh yeah, by the way, my family didn't lift a finger to help me for any of this. Not when I asked my sisters to come grab my computer and electronics in emergency. As for my father and Edith, they were on a cruise ship somewhere in the South Pacific. As to one of the 2 or 3 vacations they take a year. 2 birds with 1 stone. Two birds with 1 stone. The new roommate was a fucking narc-cokehead degenerate and can be almost expected at this point. Same narc playbook with the added bonuses of his backstabbing and dizzying number of people and some animal neglect. His cat drank out of the toilet. I even openly referred to him as a narcissist with a mutual colleague we'll call John Henry, whom I had met the year prior. At this point, I'd had enough, and with my job extended for another year, I was finally ready to get my own place. John Henry needed a place too, and I really could have used the extra rent money. I knew it wouldn't be a bed of roses, but at least my name would be on the lease. My family pushed for me to get my own place as well, naturally because of the roommate experiences, but really because my father had sold his house and needed to get rid of this giant pile of stuff. Edith had some cottages up north that they vacationed at regularly and used at least one entire cottage for storage. It was all junk that should have been trashed, but hoarders will hoard. My aunt, father's sister, also had some furniture and items to get rid of. I discovered she was a massive hoarder, as you had to see it to believe it. It was all kismet, and I got an apartment for John Henry and I. My family proceeded to dump their old junk onto, as they are prone to do, and of course only to later tell me that I have too much stuff. My grandmother, bless her soul, bought me a new bed, and my father, to his credit, did buy me some useful household appliances. But one of them worth mentioning was the fridge. The former tenant took the fridge, so I naively asked my father if the fridge in the basement was available. He said he'd buy a new one. I thanked him, but said I prefer to use fridge since I didn't expect to keep it when I would move. He insisted he send me a brochure to pick from. I picked the second least expensive fridge, the one that wasn't a glorified cooler, and responded with a sarcastic, "Thought you'd want it bigger." Later he got called concerning my bed for some odd reason, and he had a tantrum, texting me at work 3 times within 15 minutes. I angrily responded back, and he played his trademark victim role. Edith later made me apologize to him. Edith later made me apologize to him on the day of the move. When I would move 4 years later, that exact scenario I said would happen. I had to get rid of my fridge and couldn't sell it because the damage caused by John Henry. Fuck my life. I had managed to kill 2 birds with 1 stone. The last piece of shit I was living with, and just things were getting scarier again with Marlowe, late night texts and the like. I changed my phone number and blocked his 2 Facebook accounts. That's right, too. He was cut off from me and at work. I finally had my own place, some peace and freedom that came from an environment that I could control. All right. Respite, 2013 to 2017. The high of finally getting my own apartment didn't last long, as my new security meant the unloading and processing of all the past trauma I had experienced all the years prior, and thus began a long, bitter, torturous crawl out of depression over the next several years. Being in a lot of horrible pain, I got hustled by a new age con artist named Etienne Charland for a few $1,000s, which would trap me in debt for some time. Years later, I would threaten to sue him and got some of the money back. My roommate John Henry was fine enough to socialize with most of the time, but that was about it. He was toxic and a covert narc with his mask slipping off, and my home was basically a private crash pad drug den, which he treated accordingly. He was a literal bum with unknown source of income who was positively indigent at even doing less than the bare minimum of chores. Despite him taking meds for schizophrenia, he would accuse me of mental illness because I cleaned my bathroom and vacuum every other month. He was more tolerable than the other roommates, but after 3 years together, I let John Henry know I would prefer to live alone, and he left without incident. By then, he was being totally creepy, weird, shut-in, smoking from his bong nonstop until the air in the apartment was so thick and nasty it felt like a marsh. He would routinely take down the smoke detector to indulge in his habit, and I even caught him burning documents in my sink with a large fire, likely documents implicating him in some sort of fraud. It would take 2 years to really get this guy out of my system. My job would be permanent but low-paying and highly exploitive. It kept me trapped in the debt cycle and stuck living check to check. There were no raises in all the 4 terrible years I worked there. Heck, in 2014, I worked 50 weeks, no vacation, no life, and was in more debt at the end of the year than at the beginning. I left that job in the spring of 2016 with a myriad of health problems, including tendonitis, back problems. To offset my health problems stemming from working in offices, I made the switch to bartending to acquire some motor skills that had atrophied over the decades. Plus, I figured it would be a useful skill to have when I moved to another city. I took some courses at some top institutions and drove into the industry, adjusting quickly to the physical demands. I would eventually end up at a very prestigious bar in the cocktail community. French-run, harsh, toxic, unforgiving, and often abusive environment where people typically did not last long. I didn't have a hope in hell of lasting there. But in the end, after 4 of the most physically taxing months of my life, I was finally let go. By then, I wanted to leave, so I was quite happy with how it turned out, and I earned a lot of confidence as well as a good reputation because of it. Another thing worth noting is that halfway through the year in 2016, my father finally decided to bribe me with some financial assistance, which I am grateful for. But as my friend would say at the time, someone finally smacked him upside the head. I was relieved to at long last get some help. But I knew from my experience that at some point the other shoe would drop, and this made me very wary. At the end of the year, my grandmother died, and I knew my time with my family was drawing to an end. Yeah, dude, if you're going to get upset every time a family member dies, and you're going to go into a deep depression every time, if you're going to use every normal thing in life that happens, you're going to just have a miserable life. My own place, 2017 to now. 2017 was not that great. I was unemployed and ended up working at a very bad bar and restaurant jobs at various events for the first part of the year. I also had to move and decided to move closer to my family to ensure that they would at least help me this time. They resented that I lived several miles from them and found an apartment and was able to move with my family's help, as Edith declared that I wasn't to move again for 5 years. But the apartment was problematic, to say the least. The front door was damaged somehow, and it took the scumbag landlords a year to fix it. I had some crazy old boomer narc neighbors who should have been evicted years ago but continue to cause problems for everyone, especially me. The apartment was not up to code and had not been renovated for decades. Every week there's a new problem and it's a fire hazard. I had to buy my own extinguishers and smoke detectors. I told my family about it but literally said nothing, ignored me, and continued talking about something else. Shortly after moving in, I went to LA for a week for an actor's workshop, but my father gave me some drama before going, including a good dose of my father's self-styled legendary patience when I didn't respond to him while sleeping. My youngest sister wrote to me because my father, as usual, felt I was ripping him off with his financial support. When I didn't respond right away because I was sleeping from doing my bar job, she would repeatedly text me in thuggish messages to respond. I finally wrote an email back telling her I paid for the trip myself. I had been working all year, including 12 days straight at 3 different jobs in April, literally breaking my back, and was not taking my father for a ride. She replied back thanking me for the information and asking permission to share it, which I did. They backed down then, at least for a little bit. My sister also did write to me around the same time about how expensive LA was, implying I shouldn't move there. Pretty weird considering I was only going to an Airbnb for a week. I could feel the noose tightening around my neck. At this time, as I mentioned, I had busted my neck and back twice, working in 2 small environments, and had a total burnout and exhaustion. Dude, how many times are you going to be burnt out and exhausted in your life? How many times are you going to be burnt out, exhausted, suicide? How many times? How many times is it going to be total burnout? Dude, you're histrionic. You're histrionic. You got histrionic tendencies that, like, look, you were set on the wrong path when you were a child, where it's this need, and your need is this histrionic need. I'm gonna kill myself. Nothing goes right, and you keep setting yourself up and putting yourself in these ridiculous situations. And that's what they are, ridiculous situations. It worries me because this was originally 20,000 words. And I asked you to get it down to 5, and then you said it can't get it down to less than 16,000. What is it going to be? And I'm telling you, there is no reason why you couldn't get this down to under 3,000 words, 4,000 words. None. 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 This is part of your codependency, is what you're doing here. You're drawing people in. You're making it drawn out. It's just another form of hoarding. It's another form of your mother's diabetes. It's what you are. This is a form of control for you. I couldn't move or get out of bed, and I was barely able to feed myself. I mean, come on. Come on, you're a man in your 30s and you can't feed yourself. This is the histrionics, where people just like, Nobody wants to deal with a histrionic man. Nobody. I was barely able to feed myself, and this persisted for over a year and a half to this day. After finishing off the year working the most horrible job I ever had, on a side note, do not ever buy furniture from a Wayfair-like company called Structable. I was able to land a calm, stable office job for 2018. And I'm finally ready to start a calm, stable life in my own place. Things finally settling down, and still reeling from all the damage from the nightmares I just went through. My rage towards my family grew and grew. I finally knew it was time to deal with the core problem of my life. All the abusers and victimizers I had in my life all had one thing in common and one point of origin: my father and my family. You're not going to want to hear this, dude. Your father is the symptom. Your mother was the cause of all of this. Your mother is the cause of all of this. Remember how this started an hour and a half ago. It started with your mother saying she pitied your father. Why? Your mother used your father to get what she wanted. Your mother was just as codependent, and she became codependent on you and you on her. Your codependency fed your autism. It fed her need to be a mother and maybe even live. And you are constantly seeking out these codependencies, making yourself near unmovable, just like your mother used to do with her diabetes. Right? Right? This is all histrionics, man. This shit gotta stop. Every job can't be the worst experience of your life. Every narc can't be the worst experience. Everyone can't be debilitating, knock me down to here, knock me down to there. It's knocking you down because you're dependent on it. You need it. You're wallowing in the misery. Things finally settling down and still reeling from all the damage from the nightmares I just went through. My rage towards my family grew and grew. I finally knew it was time to deal with the core problem, the core problem of my life. All the abusers and my victims and all the abusers and victimizers I had in my life had one thing in common, one point of origin: my father and my family. Your mother and your family. If your father's not the start of this, your mother is. Dealing with present-day difficulties while also focusing on my decades-long quest of healing, I began researching more on narcissism and narcissistic families. I was already familiar with the psychopathy of narcissism for some time, but my knowledge grew exponentially and became paradigm shifting. Things throughout my life are now reframed based on what I know now, and I figure it's only the beginning. Making sense of it all. Growing up, I noticed quite a lot of adults who seemed to be little more than spoiled kids who just waited it out. Not only the supposed grown-ups, but the people everywhere else as well, all acting like stupid, shallow, spoiled brats who never grew up after high school. And the world just always worked in their favor, as if they were being rewarded for being evil. Pop culture ended up providing a point of comparison. I noticed people who acted like Ricky from Trailer Park Boys, from his inability to take responsibility for anything and his way of manipulating everyone into getting out of trouble. I noticed how so many people, from my father to co-workers to roommates, were exactly like Cartman from South Park. The detailed behaviors and mannerisms, the ways of speaking, the sociopathy were identical to people in real life. My father and Edith were now David Lynchian version of Archie and Edith Bunker. Hence why I named her that, as she speaks exactly like Edith from All in the Family. Looking back, I see people in my life who may have had more tendencies than I would have figured. I'm sure once the fog clears up, the skeletons will come piling out of the closet in plenty of gory detail. Still, after researching and listening to countless survivors' stories, each one containing bits of what transpired in my life, I was able to understand and conceptualize why I felt that my very real survival depended on getting away as far as possible from my family. And this probably goes back to even before my mother's death, when a couple of occasions I recall packing up and telling my mother I'd be running away, which never ended up happening. Here's my assessment of my family, of which I'd love to have your take on. So you tell your mother you were running away. Why? Why? Because it was your way of like doing her diabetic thing? You're codependent on each other and you're still doing it. Father's family. My father, staying true to the narc playbook, kept his children all isolated to some degree from the extended family. My knowledge of them is very limited and often derived via gossip, hearsay, and some of my father's projections and smear campaigns. Despite this, Despite that, this is what I think happened. I think my father might have a bit brain damage being born so immature in the no, he doesn't have brain damage. No, he doesn't have brain damage. He's just a child. He's just a narcissistic French Canadian asshole. Just entitled. I'm telling you, the French Canadians are the most fucking entitled bunch going. And I'm telling you, your letter just kind of just has your own entitlement in here as well. A big part of this is you got to get over yourselves, all of yous. I suspect my father might have a bit of brain damage from being born so immature in the early 50s with the technology back then. The same thing happened to me in 1981 and I barely survived. I wouldn't be surprised if this amygdala got damaged, which might explain his emotional problems. I don't believe he got all his pathological behaviors from his parents. I always remembered my grandfather being like my mother, kind, gentle, caring, supportive, which he was perhaps a bit too permissive, as my father would insult him and be rude to him as on a somewhat regular basis, just as he had no problem yelling at his own mother. It did not look like my grandmother had much control over him. The only time I heard my grandfather ever came close to bad-mouthing someone was about my father. It was clear as day that my grandfather did not have much respect for my father, even with the few comments he made, which hinted at something much more bigger. He wasn't impressed by my father's craven need to have a mother figure around all the time. He recounted me how my university grades were better than my father's, and that he had to bring my father back home from university at one point because he was partying too much. Quite the contrast to my university experience, just saying. I don't think he or his family were equipped to handle Rosemary's Baby, and even my grandmother would express how she didn't know why my father treated the whole family so badly, because he's an entitled baby boomer. He's a baby boomer. Dude, he's a baby boomer. They're all fucked in the head. They all got entitlement. He's an entitled baby boomer. A French-Canadian baby boomer, no less. Holy shit. I don't think you can get much worse than that. He does not have brain damage. He's just an asshole. Patient zero. I get the impression that my father was the patient zero in his immediate family. His sister, born a year after him, is the one with an astounding level of hoarding mentioned earlier. So what's her problem? So he's a fucking raging narcissist and she's a fucking hoarder. So she's brain damaged too? They're both on the narcissism spectrum? Come on. It's just the generation, man. She is my godmother, but I never really saw her up until only recently in my life. Apparently, she was rebuilding her life for reasons I don't exactly know. She was a teacher. I know how you feel about them, but she's now retired. She's rather obese, but keeps saying how her doctor has said he wished all her patients were as healthy as her. Borderline personality disorder. That's what... Yeah. Despite her age, she is still rather childlike, often makes scenes, can get rather tiresome to deal with, as even some waitress in the restaurants try to avoid her. All this to say, I wonder how much of this is inborn and how much is due to environmental influences. Very tiring to deal with, right? Like a borderline. Your whole family is tiring to deal with. Your mother was probably tiring to deal with. You're tiring to deal with. Your grandparents were neglectful. There's no brain damage. My father's younger brother, born 5 years after him, I believe, the real first guinea pig for my father's abuse. My uncle hinted as much, once telling me with strong conviction, "I know how your father is. The evidence of the abuse is apparent. He struggles with alcoholism, some overt narcissistic tendencies, including rage outbursts, and has general type A personality who can't stand to have anyone be his boss." Growing up, it wasn't hard to tell that my father hated my uncle and was envious and jealous of him. The fact was, my father was passive-aggressively malicious towards my uncle all the time, much as he is now with me. As a child, we would watch the Beverly Hillbillies, and my father would say my uncle was stupid like Jethro. He would generally badmouth him at any and every opportunity. A lot of projections, such as when he accused my uncle of denying people wine, saying, "No, it's too good for these people." I suspect my uncle's behavior is less inborn with more of a reaction than patient zero. After all, my father's youngest brother was born over a decade years after him, and was borderline Gen Xer. He's not. He's born in the 60s. He's still a fucking piece of shit baby boomer. My father admits having moved out, and that's not all baby boomers are pieces of shit. Y'all know what I'm talking about. My father admits having moved out while the younger brother was still very young. Now my father tells him we're both the normal ones in the family. Mother's family. My mother's family is more straightforward, as they're pretty much all dead, and I know very little to nothing about them. The sole real source of information is suspect one, and it's the one I'm focusing on, Evelyn. As for my mother's little brother, he lived on the opposite side of the country all my life, and you can count on one hand the number of times I've seen them. Evelyn was born in 1950 and was adopted by my mother's family. She and my mother spent a lot of time together. Growing up on a farm in rural Ontario, my mother went to university far away from home and eventually to Montreal, while Evelyn stayed in her home. I don't know the exact timeline, but I think she moved in with my grandmother after my grandfather had died in 1982. From what I know, Evelyn tried to work at a small restaurant and wasn't able to cope. So she eventually convinced her mother to argue on her behalf to get on disability. It's the other problem in Canada. Half the country's on goddamn disability. She was successful and she's been on disability ever since. Growing up, I enjoyed her company, but as I got older, especially after my mother's death, I started to get more and more alienated from her and her childlike behavior. I felt like I was growing up, but she wasn't, and that I was there to take care of her despite me being a teenager who just lost his mother, which would persist until present day. Evelyn was also a blabbermouth who would pry you for information and then immediately go tell everyone within earshot. She got me in trouble with my father and Mussolini one time because of this. She's also pretty self-centered, talking to her phone like she was sucking the life out of you, with frequent subtle guilt-tripping and whining. She would take my accomplishments, then exaggerate them to others to brag about my nephew. Loud, sing-songing emphasis on my. One thing I noticed is that while she normally talked quasi-childlike, she would sometimes switch to a slightly annoyed adult that would seem out of character. She also had a big issue with boundaries. If that wasn't obvious enough already, I got the impression that she was in love with me, and she would interact and touch me in ways that an aunt probably shouldn't touch her adult nephew. And yes, I'm now starting to suspect there might be some suppressed stuff. Another thing one of my sisters mentioned was that Evelyn had once thrown her against the wall when she was a kid. All this to say, my Aunt Evelyn is likely a narcissist and had an undeniable effect on my mother growing up and throughout her life. Given how she used pity and guilt against my sisters as we grew up, she no doubt did it to her family as well. She's the younger sister, isn't she? I guarantee you, if Evelyn threw your sister against the wall, it's because your mother did it to her. Your mother. Listen, there's no way your mother reacted well to adopted children, because how your mother took those adoptions, I guarantee you, is, I'm not good enough for my parents, that they need to adopt 2 children. And that's where your mother's codependency came from. It's where it all came from. It's from this adoption. Not that adopting is wrong. Your mother's a narcissistic little baby boomer. It was a narcissistic little baby boomer to begin with. So. Sisters. My sisters were both the golden children and basically lived a life apart from me. They went to the same nearby schools together, had the same friends and social circles, worked at the same jobs as teenagers, and are almost inseparable. They were more normal than I was, and my father used that as an excuse to absolve himself of any failure of parenting on his part. He'd dramatically say it in a "he's not my fault, the others turned out all right" type of dismissal that I'm sure other narcissist survivors have heard before. They were rewarded accordingly. Aside from their own trips, studying and backpacking in Europe, my father would also take them to Europe and elsewhere on multiple occasions. Edith would eventually do this as well. Me, never once. The only trip he took me was to New Orleans, which, despite saying he was doing because it was my turn in a sing-songy voice, he would later reveal that my youngest sister was slated to go, but had to drop out the last minute. Growing up, they basically treated me like my father did, only with more morsels of acknowledgement, put-downs, constant criticism, sarcasms, dismissal that ranged from annoyed to outrage if I asked for help, and basically being bossed around. When they would try to show genuine concern and affection, it sounded forced and guilty, like they weren't allowed to be nice to me. All in all, I grew up alone, isolated, in unimaginable pain and suffering, watching my sisters go about having the nice, comfortable, middle-class suburb life. I can only assume that part of them, they did care about me and knew things weren't right. But my father surely fought that every chance he had and smeared to keep me isolated. For example, when I moved out in 2005, I would visit him and he would give me some financial help. I would try talking and be social to him, only for him to angrily brush me off. Later on, he would tell my sisters that I would only go to him for money and don't say anything to him. Same story my whole life. I'm abusive, lazy mooch who's always ripping off my father. They would take that story to heart to this day. They, along with my sister's husband, along with my sister's husband, who joined the fund back in 2004, would triangulate me to the present moment as well, acting as the bona fide flying monkeys for my father. I also knew my sisters were spying on me since at least 2002, going on my computer, reading my writings, and who knows what else. To this day, they would interrogate me in a weird manner, asking some non sequitur questions, almost robot-like, as if Alexa or some AI was trying to fish for info. Like my father, they would typically bring mixed results and require coddling. So I avoided asking them for help as much as possible, and it was unlikely they'd provide it anyhow. And if they did, it would be used against me as some opportunity to spy on me. For example, last year my sister came up to help me clean up my apartment, and it was akin to an FBI raid. Why does your sister need to come help you clean your apartment? You're a grown-ass man. See, this is where you're sabotaging yourself. Stop with the codependency bullshit. And then you're turning around like, oh, she's violating me. Why are you letting her in? Why do you need, you're in your 30s or 40s by now, right? Why is your sister showing up to clean your apartment? It was akin to an FBI raid, ransacking my place, no respect for my boundaries whatsoever. And to be clear, they know my father has problems. Heck, a cashier or a waiter who he and Edith are typically rude to can tell there's something wrong with them. My sisters complained about him all their lives. His lack of empathy, the parentification, the throwing money at problems to solve them, isolating us from the rest of the family, once calling him a fucking loser. It goes on. My youngest sister even mentioned at one point considering emancipation as a teenager. They're well aware but continue to play his game with me paying the price for it. This all goes to show my sisters have firmly drunk the Kool-Aid and are card-carrying flying monkeys from my father. Aside from that, we have no real bond or healthy relationship to speak of, and I fear I'll snap at them soon due to their constant jabs and gaslighting. I have no idea how to think. I'll just keep tolerating all this. You're tolerating all this because you are perpetuating the problem. You are stirring the pot. You are letting them in. You are like, I'm a victim. In a lot of these, you're not a victim. You're not a victim in a lot of this. And you're making it real easy for them to call you a moocher when they're coming into your apartment to clean it. And it's like you're into your 30s and your 40s and you're still kind of expecting financial help from your father. You shouldn't even want you shouldn't want their help if they offer it to you, let alone seek it out. Edith, my father's common-law boomer wife, Edith, who he's been with since 2007, is, I believe, a covert narc, likely inverted. She has 3 children with her previous husband before divorcing him and eventually ended up with my father. 2 of the children were twin sons who had grown up in the 20s, not really working, living a sort of rock star lives with some. You're just way too involved in everybody's backstory and not involved enough in your own life. I mean, you've written me 16,000 words with detail of what everyone else's background is. Living some sort of rock star lives in some Peter Pan syndrome, Edith's words, much to the chagrin of my father. They also ended up getting their mother's condo when she and my father moved downtown from the suburbs. Edith learned quickly the ropes and joined in on the gang up on me. Being a flying monkey and cat's paw from my father, she strikes me just as obsessed with money and status as my father, and this includes some pretty pathological hoarding behavior, which they both seem to encourage in each other. She herself has been very skilled with money since adolescence and has been able to acquire rental property and several cottages, all while working her entire life as a flight attendant. Boomer much? She waits on my father hand and foot, literally, in case of the latter. She has to put on his socks for him. She generally treats him like a kid, which he wants, and he still wears a bib to this day, throws mild tantrums if served vegetables, and plays the victim when she's away on flights and not around to cook for him. Like my sisters, she's phony as a $3 bill. She'll gaslight me and sing songy voices. Generally pisses in my ear and tells me it's raining. And when the mask drops, gets suddenly aggressive with me. Anything to do with me, she, like my sisters, runs it by my father first, to the point where she won't even respond to text and email requests for simple advice. She acts like, why are you going to her for advice? Why would you go to her for advice? Why? Why are you keep touching a hot stove and then getting mad when it burns you? Why? And you get every little fucking detail of the hot stove burning you and where the stove came from and who sold the stove. Stop. Why are you doing this? Because it makes you, I think you're trying to make yourself into a bigger victim. Because you're trying to do the same thing your father and your mother and everyone else in your family does, is infantilize yourself. You're all using each other. All of you. I think you're all using each other. Like my sister, whose phone is a $3 bill, she'll gaslight me and sing songy voices, generally pisses in my ear, tells me it's raining. When the mask drops, suddenly gets aggressive with me. Okay. She acts like the lieutenant to the capo, interrogating me as a mouthpiece for my father, who sulks in the background. This is all in contrast to the very positive and friendly relationship she has with my sisters. She, like my sisters, knows that this is abuse, but she willingly participates in it nonetheless. She knows that my father is a man-child who throws money at her, and so that it just makes the whole thing even more sordid. Bottom line, she's willingly chosen to be my father for 12 years and is happy as a clam. This speaks volumes of who she is. Father. As for my father, he's a bit similar to the one described in your video, covert narc in plain sight. A childlike, malignant, entitled narcissist who resents having to work. He is obsessive about hard work, although how much of it was out of genuinely held principle and how much of it was a result of his workaholic perfectionism or schizoid tendencies, I don't know. He would use it all the time to basically act officious and make himself feel superior. He was Mary fucking Poppins, practically perfect in every way. He had to be a martyr, and hard work was his means to the end, something he imparted onto me early on and affected nearly all of my working life. I worked really hard at whatever job I did and only ended up being the work office bitch, working more than others, sacrificing myself while others benefited. Instead of being rewarded for hard work, I was basically a chump and a sucker. It was one of the many programs I picked up from him that I spent half a lifetime fighting into programming. Even as a child, I knew I wouldn't survive using him as a model for behavior, and I got this far in life because of that. I had known as far back of age 5 that there was something off with my father. Not too long after, I found out that he was a liar, even though I didn't know why. I always knew he was petty, greedy, OCD, and swings between pathologically cheap to lavishing generosity if it was something he wanted himself, such as eating out. He was extremely possessive of everything, and even lending a video game he bought me to someone would cause him to explode. Like all narcs, asking for the smallest favor or amount of aid, he'll sulk, make a scene, and guilt trip. He'd always yell, as an afterthought, "I'm doing this for you." And true to form, his consistent gaslighting and blame shifting, pathologically refusing to take any responsibility or ownership for anything. Double standards and goalpost shifting abounded, and dealing with him was a constant game of heads I win, tails you lose. He was also sadistic, never passing an opportunity to kick someone when they're down. And of course, backpedal and play the victim if called out on it. He'd stir up shitstorms, and then he would get all giddy and grin like a little kid when it worked. Despite that, he would always portray himself as the eternal victim at every opportunity, and his flying monkeys all swallowed it hook, line, and sinker. I don't know if he was ever genuinely victimized when he was younger, but I don't think it matters much at this point. I'm sure in his mind that the fact that he was the fifth that he wasn't the fifth Beatle, or in this motorcade, or that his motorcade broke down on the way to Woodstock, not making that up, is enough to brand himself the eternal victim. Judge Narc. With all that in mind, let me reveal a little plot twist. My father had actually became a judge over a decade ago while I was in university. If that weren't enough, he'd become a superior court judge about a half decade ago. Yes, you heard it right. My father, the infantile covert narc, a man who's chronically lying machine, a total hypocrite, who's pathologically incapable of being held accountable for anything he does, is a superior court judge. Of course he is. That's why he judges everybody. Judges do what they do. They judge everybody in life, so you don't judge them. All a judge is a super lawyer narc. That's all that is. All I can say for that is I really don't want to know what this guy did to get these jobs, much less know the damage he's done with the power he's been given. I got a taste of that last year for my birthday. As typical for my birthday, my father took me and some family members to a restaurant of his choosing, and then promptly ignored me for 99% of the evening. Not uncommon. When I was younger at home, he would repeatedly insist on leaving the TV on as we sang happy birthday. At one point, he began gossiping about his despised younger middle brother, going into great detail about his financial and marital problems. This went on for a half an hour before he bragged about how he had modified the display name on his email client software and had written to my uncle's now separated wife recommending she get legal advice against my uncle. My father had earlier said that as a judge, he's not allowed to provide legal advice, yet here he is going to great lengths to do just that, all to stick it to his brother. My father has always been bashing my uncle, but this was pretty low. I'm certain my father would rationalize it as concern for my aunt, but his mocking of her and my uncle's parenting ability shortly thereafter would prompt anyone to call bullshit. It made me realize that my father has been poisoning the family for decades, pitting each member against each other, smearing, spreading disinformation, and I suspect I'm the only one in the family aware of this and will need to expose it to the rest of them. On another note, I'm also suspicious that my father might be withholding a possible inheritance from my grandparents. I don't have any specific reason to assume my grandparents left me anything, but with my father stealing my mother's money she left me, and in his general he doesn't deserve it attitude he has towards me, I can't shake the feeling. Don't worry about what he's withholding from you at this point. Don't worry about it. He's not your problem. Your mother was. Well, he means your problem now. He's not the cause of your problems. Almost through this. Going no contact. For decades, I've longed to get financial get financial independence, to gain actual independence from my family, but instead I've been trapped in debt, sick, barely able to afford necessities and take care of myself. The reason why is because you've been looking to be codependent on somebody your entire life. That's why you're in the situation you are. That's why. You put yourself in this situation. I didn't understand why everything was so hard, why everything backfired, why everyone I met in my life prospered and grew while I was always failing and sliding backwards. All this while my family lives in fairly comfortable middle-class life, talking endlessly about TV shows and all the vacations they take, and even poop jokes. The few times they talk to me, they ask awkward questions to strike up fake perfunctory conversation before they clock out and continue to ignore me. Most of the times they just mock me or act like sarcastic twits. If I try to share my opinion, I'm met with scorn and derision. But most of the time they just minimize or dismiss anything I say, because I'm crazy and exaggerate everything. They would make fun of me eating, slowly growing up, only to make jokes of how much I eat at family dinners now. They joke about how I'm eating for the week, which is true since I'm broke, borderline alcoholic zombie with CPTSD who lives alone and uses all my energy cooking whatever I can for myself every night. There you go again. See, you got to stop with the histrionic shit. That's histrionic shit. Stop, you can. You're 6'4" man. Don't tell me you don't have the energy to get up and... Of course you do. Stop. You're still going with the codependency and the bullshit. Stop. There's barely any pretense of respect for any and every single member of the family. They all continue to shut me up, shut me out, and shut me down because the histrionics become exhausting. That's why. The histrionics become exhausting. Fed up. My whole adult life, I was tired of having to tepidly defend my family to people in vain, and eventually I just stopped. I was tired of so many people telling me to get away from my family. People constantly saying, I don't get it. Your family is rich. Your parents are rich. Why aren't they helping you? One friend years ago telling me that my father doesn't help me, and that my father, quote, is a pig, not just because he's obese, because how selfish he is. People would point out that my father would be lying to me, such as with the car insurance for me to drive a Chevy Malibu when I got my learner's permit. It was some exorbitant fee that no one whom I told to believe for a second. Unless your father is leasing a Ferrari, there's no way insurance costs that much. He's lying to you. Someone's exact words. Speaking of my license, after over a decade of trying and thousands of dollars spent, I finally got my license, and even though I wasn't expecting anything from my father, he got me a gift, a hamburger from Wendy's, a nice 2011 Baconator, and some trademark silent treatment. When I finally got my friend's 16-year-old car last year at the age of 36 for $150, he emailed me telling me he was very upset I didn't talk to him about it before. Wonder why. All of this is bad enough, but the past couple of years have shown that things are getting worse, much worse, and I needed to get out now for my own sake, health and well-being. It's all but evident that I'm a prisoner in a narcissistic cult family with a Carmen-like narcissist at the center, ordering his flying monkeys out to do his bidding, all while sprawled out on his couch, binging on junk food, online shopping, and gin, only one brand, and other is a waste of time. They serve him, protect him, deny any wrongdoing on his part in his treatment towards me. Any half-wit off the street could see within minutes that my father hates me, that he just as he hated my mother, whom I look like. He finds more and more issues to have them triangulate on me. For example, his constant claim that I'm somehow not working or taking advantage of him. I'm 37 years old, and I have lived a shadow of a life compared to them. I've had to go through it. I've had to go through it, writing it all off, mourning it afterwards, saying it just wasn't meant to be, regardless if I was a child, in high school, or an adult. I'm entering middle age, having my entire youth taken away by my evil, sick, degenerate father. As a result of him, my life has been degrading, shameful, and utterly humiliating beyond description. This amount of shit that insults, the amount of shit, the insults to injury I have endured from the countless bits of human trash throughout my life, my beggar's life belief. And I won't be able to stop it unless I get away from the family. Well, that's the one thing. Like, all these words, all this time, nothing changes until you get away from them. Writing a 2.5-hour letter here just comes off as histrionic. And I got to be honest with you, it keeps going back to money. The reason why they keep accusing you of being after money is because it keeps going back to money. And I get it. I mean, they use money as a means of control. But you're a man who's been through college, who's been back and forth to college, who's had multiple opportunities, who's had the decisions you've made have been your own because you've been trying to stay in a constant state of codependency. The only thing you got right here is that nothing's going to change until you get away from your family. Nothing. This is why I'm telling you, this whole thing could have been cut down to 3,000 words. The cycle repeats. I bet it does. My sisters now in their 30s are already turning into my father in many respects. My younger sister now has the exact same narc rage expression as my father, which really freaked me out. The lifelong damage in programming has taken its full effect. They are becoming more and more enmeshed with him. My middle sister had a daughter 4 years ago, and I was named the godfather. I didn't understand at the time they considered me a lazy fuck-up loser who would be a bad influence and even a worse parent. Either way, I could barely take care of a houseplant, so I was confused. Now I know control. She had another son just last year too, and early as last year I can see the cycle continuing. My father constantly demanding attention from his infant granddaughter, complaining repeatedly when he doesn't have it, all on top of his nonstop barking at everyone, keeping them all on edge like Pavlov's dogs. Still, my father is alienating the rest of the family who wish to move away from TV and technology and do more physical activities. An impossibility with my father as he's almost immobile because of his obesity. They put up a timid request that he take care of his health for his grandchildren, but he does nothing as far as I can tell. They have no idea how to deal with them and are clueless as to what the real problem is. They have even less power over him as they are utterly under his thumb for decades of narc abuse. It's a train wreck in the making. Yeah, he's Jabba the Hutt. He's Jabba the Hutt. He sits there feeding, judging, pushing people around, and getting attention. He's Jabba the fucking Hutt. Sorry, but Jabba the Hutt is not your fucking problem. The Emperor is. And the Emperor was your mother. Your mother's the one who caused all of this shit. My father's never going to change, and if Edith wants to change his diapers to get his pension, that's her business. And if my sister and her family can't stand up to him, that's on them. As for me, I have no intention of letting my father call in the transaction gifts to clean up his mess after all his decades of irresponsibility. It's a time bomb that's going to go off at some point soon, and I have no intention of being around there when it does. I'd like to care, but I don't. I can't stand these fucking people, and I have absolutely nothing in common with them. About time you figured that out. I have more in common with the poor whites and the people of color who make up my friends. The psychopaths I live with help me more than these people. This past decade, I spent more time hanging out with and relying on schizophrenic drug dealers and former stick-up kids than my own family. Many friends I've met over the years have seen and have been through some incredibly fucked up shit. Some even knowing who died violent deaths, but all of it completely out of the reality of any member of my family. Instead, they fret and gossip about middle-class bullshit, whereas I would go 1 year without having a sociopath threatening me. My family of origin know nothing about me and are perfectly happy that way. I'm sure despite their grip on me, they'd love nothing more for me to leave, especially my father. Well, guess what? It's their lucky day. I'm all too happy to oblige them and start a new life without them in it. They can find another scapegoat to blame and dump all their own bullshit problems on. I swallowed and dealt with enough of their crap. As for my father's will, even if he did leave me money, which he won't, it'll still be a pittance compared to the amount of money that Edith's kids will all end up with. So he can forget about using it as leverage over me. Not my problem. It's tragic to see the family with some good, healthy potential, despite everything. This is in this horrible situation, especially with the newest generation there, to be offered up on a silver platter by their Muppet parents to feed the beast. The same beasts who will demand more and more from the parents and make them neglect their own children, who will in turn quickly grow up angry, resentful, and bitter. But if I were dumb enough to stick around to white knight and save my family and the younger generation, I'll just continue being the punching bag for all of them. Not to mention take the fall for any abuse that might go on in the meantime. Even now, my sister lies and tries to put words in her daughter's mouth to shame me if I don't come up to a family function due to illness. So fuck it. Like there would be, like they would say at one of my job calls, at my call center jobs, notmyproblem.com. For fuck's sake, my father drove me to suicide. The family he corrupted and ruined and has abused and neglected me my whole life, causing untold damage. I'll continue to being their prisoner with their boots on my neck, mentally if not physically, until I cut ties with them. I would love for them, as an argument, not to commit suicide, not to screw them up, and I would love for them as an argument to not commit suicide, to not screw them up anymore. These people have the lives and happiness they have now because of my battles and sacrifices. The people in our family now should never even met me, as I should have died long time ago. Yet, despite that, they all partake in the abuse and dismissive contempt with zero empathy or respect for anyone. And finally, as the events of fall 2012 to winter 2013 demonstrate, these people abandoned me in a nightmarish hellhole and left me to fucking die. If this isn't a deal breaker in the old family contract, I don't know what is. Advice. I'm at my wit's end with them and worried things could get ugly at any point. This compels me to formulate a plan to finally go full no contact this year. I'm planning on recruiting allies because I will definitely need backup. You're not going to recruit any ally. Listen. You need... We're going right to the fucking codependency thing again. You got to do this on your own. Stop being dependent on them. You're a 37-year-old man. If you can't figure out with a job, okay, and with access to funds, which I know you have on your own, because you know, we made a deal to do this. You have everything you need to get out. You don't need allies. You just need to save money and go. Stop with the codependency bullshit. You can't bring anybody into your fucking life until these people are out of it. Period. And after 2 hours and 29 minutes, okay, that's the point. If that's the advice you wanted, there's no bringing anybody into your life right now until you get these people out. Period. You have everything you need to get out. Stop worrying about where your father's money's going. Stop worrying about, you know, Edith's kids or whose kids or your sister's kids. Worry about yourself. My father's not going to let me go without a fight. You're a 37-year-old man. You got a bank account? You got credit cards? What's the fight? You got a car? What's the fight? You can live anywhere you want in Canada. Get the fuck out of Quebec. You're English speaking anyway. And I have quite a lot of flying monkeys to contend with, some of whom live near with me. Funny, you cut out the drug dealer, though, didn't you? Studying narcissism has made me realize that I now need to be even more paranoid because I truly don't know what my father is capable of. He was always into James Bond. What do you mean? James Bond style gadget. You said he's fat as fuck and can't get up. Stop making excuses. This is more histrionics. Stop it. James style gadgets, toys, along with computers, even has spy cameras in his own apartment. Really? How did they get installed? He paid to have them installed? He's fat as fuck. Stop making excuses. Last year he gave us all the Title app keychains that can help track your keys, and I suspect he might be used to track us. And even sometimes I worry he has access to the hand-me-down tablet he gave me, and he even has a key logger on it or not. Then there's copies of all my key government documents he has as well. What advice would you give me for this type of situation, especially considering my father is a Superior Court judge who can I only assume has access to tools and powers that make things difficult for me. Any legal protections I could consider, would moving before going no contact be a good idea? Maybe. What do you mean he has your key documents? All key documents are replaceable. Figure out how to replace them without having to even ask them. Figure out, you don't necessarily have to tell them you're going no contact, just go. Get your key documents replaced, because what happens if they're lost? What happens if the house burned down? You got to have a replacement for a way to replace them. Get your key documents replaced on your own. Don't even ask your father. Go get a P.O. box, have them sent to a P.O. box, all your documents and all your mail sent to a fucking P.O. box that he doesn't know about. And have your documents replaced. Have a bank account set up to a P.O. box. So the bank statements go to a P.O. box if you can't get mail at your house. And go. Stop making excuses. Conclusion. A child should not be existentially depressed while barely in grade school grade school, realizing something is seriously wrong with him and the world around them. He should not spend so much time wishing his life was different, wishing they could go back in time to fix things or read people's mind or just plain disappear. A child shouldn't grow up well into adulthood believing everyone hates them, that it's impossible for anyone to like them, that they deserve only bad and nothing good out of life. They shouldn't grow up void of any physical contact, affection, or as an adult intimacy all the way into middle age, having spent every Valentine's Day of his life alone. A 12-year-old shouldn't be compelled to throw themselves off a cliff and spend the rest of his life regretting that he didn't. This list could go on forever, but either way, this has been my life up until this point. A Black Mirror-esque type of nightmare where I'm a front row and center at seeing my life pass by right before me, and I'm powerless to do anything about it except beat myself up for it afterwards. I have no idea how I'm still alive. I literally don't. I should have died many times, given up everything I've been through. Despite all the bad luck, I've managed to get a lucky break every now and then. I'm especially grateful for the very few in my life who were good to me and helped me out of the many times of need. I don't know where I would be right now if it weren't for them. Like in Shawshank Redemption, I had to survive, adapt, smarten up, and eventually crawl through a mile of shit to get to freedom. I still have countless health problems like scaticlia, epicondylitis, adrenal and chronic fatigue, leaky gut, neck problems, some scoliosis, to name a few. I only have enough energy to work and take care of myself, but apart from that, I'm in constant physical pain and completely drained and can barely move and get out of bed, as I have for years now. Get up. Get up. Stop it. Stop. Nobody wants to hear it, dude. Nobody wants to hear it out of a 37-year-old man who's 6'4". Get up. You can't call your father a fat motherfucker and then do this. Get up. Insomnia still rears its head from time to time. As for jobs and money, it could be worse, but it's far from stable or ideal. Right now, money-wise, with a small debt as well, going no contact won't be easy, but freedom from my family is worth the price. I'd rather die on my feet than live on my knees. But all of the above doesn't discourage me. My tireless efforts are starting to pay off. I recovered a lot the past year or so, and I feel great as I've ever been. I've accomplished things that would have been deemed impossible only a few years prior. It's a long, hard road out of hell, and I have no illusions that the rest of the road to recovery will be an easy one. I know I've been dealing with my past and all that entails until my dying days, and yet I struggled, endured something unfathomable, something no one else would reasonably assume, and I would escape out alive. But I did. I survived. I earned my life, and now I listen, and now I intend to take it back. Thank you. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak my story, Ollie. Your validation is a watershed moment for me. This was the first time I ever completely told my story to anyone. A story I never thought would see the light of day. The value and necessity of what you do cannot be overstated, and its impact is likely larger than any one of us could realize. I believe we have yet to see the full effect of it. It inspired me to share my knowledge, experience, and wisdom of what I've acquired to help other survivors reclaim their lives to try to reverse this narcissism pandemic. On a side note, you should definitely ball with your baby boomer theory and your take on societal narcissism. It's like a mix of the Matrix, They Live, and Invasion of the Body Snatchers all happening in real life. I liken it to the Carlos Castaneda concept of predators of man, who implant into us their own minds as a way of enslaving us in fear being found out above all else, exactly like ours. You're absolutely right about one thing, Ollie. It's a choice. It's always a choice. And that's what separates us from them. Again, thank you so much for all that you do. I look forward to hearing what you have to say about my situation, along with the opinions of many members of the community as well. I'm looking forward to the day where I can finally be free of my narc family and get rid of all their junk and move far, far away. And then I may finally discover who I really am and start truly living my life for myself. All the best to you and Charlene. Anonymous. You could have wrapped that up a lot sooner, because you got it right at the end here. Nothing's going to change until you move away and get these people out of your life. Don't bother bringing people into your life until you get the narcissist out. Nothing will work otherwise. So, I hope that helps. Thank you so much for your contribution and your story, Anonymous. I really appreciate it. If you're still with me, thank you to everybody watching. Please leave any opinions or advice in the comments section below. And again, if you want your story read on the channel, you have a topic you'd like me to cover, a narcissist you'd like to expose, you'd like to set up Skype, a phone call, have a private video made, or a Facebook live chat, or you'd like to sponsor a video like this for someone who needs help and can't afford it, or just make a contribution to the channel in general to keep it supported, growing, and successful, because this channel survives 100% on contributions from all of you. Without you guys, all this goes away. So if you like what you see here and you want to see more videos like this, you know what to do with the PayPal and email links in the description box. Also, please like and share this video wherever you can. Subscribe to my channel if you haven't, and be sure to click the subscription bell to be notified of all my video uploads. I'm Ollie Matthews. This has been the Narcissistic Resistance.